Hello everyone and welcome to another vlogmas video. I have filmed many of these videos and have been naming it vlogmas, and it has just come to my attention that there is also called bookmas. And I don't know how I've been on this platform for so many years and consuming AuthorTube and BookTube content, and I just found out about bookmas, and now I feel like this is more accurate to this series that I'm doing. But you know what? We committed to vlogmas, so we are doing vlogmas without vlogs. Welcome to my 2023 worst books of the year. So worst books could easily be clickbait because one, this is subjective, it's my opinion, and two, not all of these were like absolute garbage fires or terrible books, but they really didn't land well for me, and for that reason they are on my least favorite, most disappointing worst books of the year. So without further ado, let's just jump into what books I didn't like this year. I have 6 books for you, and at the number 6 spot, this one actually hurts me to put it on here, but it has to be done. And that's An Abundance of Katherines by John Green. I love John Green. Like, he is one of my favorite authors. I really enjoy him as a human, and I really do like his writing style. I know it's not for everybody, but I love it, and the books that I have read from him have been some of my favorites of all times, like Looking for Alaska, The Fault in Our Stars, and The Ambrosine Reviewed. So I really thought I was gonna like this just because I like John Green. But An Abundance of Katherines follows a kid named Colin, and Colin has an obsession with numbers and particularly dating girls who are named Catherine. He has dated 19 of them, and it's just kind of like this fixture now. I'm sure, and knowing like John Green's later works like Turtles All the Way Down and John Green's OCD diagnosis himself and his talk about it, I'm sure this has a play to do with the numbers and like everything, but it wasn't the focus of that. It was just like the basis of the novel. And basically this is kind of like a semi-road trip story where Colin kind of ends up living with some of these people that he somewhat has a connection to, like a friend of a friend, and works there for the summer and gets to know this new girl who's also named Catherine, but she goes by like a nickname. It was just rather boring. I have not much to say about this because I didn't really feel connected to the characters. I wasn't really interested in what the characters were talking about or doing or saying, and I didn't really feel the chemistry between Colin and Catherine. And overall, like, it was just a fine book, but it is a book that I am going to be unhauling because it didn't keep my interest. So as much as I love John Green, this one was a miss for me. For similar reasons, at the number 5 spot, I have Midnight Thief by Livia Blackburn. This book was also just kind of a bland and boring book to me. It follows a young girl named Kira who is kind of like misplaced. She's a thief. She tries to steal everything for a living, and she's an orphan. So naturally, she's kind of like a chosen one. There is a cool magic system in that there are shapeshifters, and in particular, there are like were-panthers, and I liked that concept. But the whole novel with the thievery into potential secret royalty / secret magic abilities, it just felt like something that has been done many times before. And when this book came out, which I believe was like 2012, it probably was a relatively fresh take or an interesting take then. But in the 11 years or so since it was debuted, it's something that I've read a lot, and therefore it just didn't really stick out in my head. This was actually my July book club pick, and I was really the only one to read it, with one other member who also finished it but didn't finish it on time for the book club. We ended up canceling that book club meeting because I was the only one that read it for the time of the book club, and everybody else either couldn't finish it or didn't even bother finishing it. So I don't know why it won book club that month as the pick, because it was a weird time. Everybody else either couldn't get into the book, and the one person that did finish it also said it was relatively bland and uninteresting. So it hurts to say that because I am wanting to read this author again, but as a debut and reading it 10 years after the fact, it just didn't hit for me. At number 4, I have Damned If You Do by Alex Brown. Full disclosure, this was one of my 2 DNFs of the year. I made this 58% of the way through and truly could not fathom continuing it. This book follows a teenager named Cordelia, and when Cordelia was younger, she accidentally made a deal with a demon and sent her father to hell. And now at 16 or 17 years old, I believe she's 17, another demon came to collect on that bargain made. And she kind of has to admit that she did make the deal in the first place and knew that she sent her father away instead of this lie that her father like ditched her family and moved to Florida. Now, it makes sense because the father is abusive, so slight trigger warning for physical and mental abuse in a home, but we don't really see that on page, and the father, for what I read in 50%, is only mentioned, so we don't really see his interactions. But this said, and I will read from the back of the book, this is queer Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Filipino folklore in this heartfelt horror comedy about a high school stage manager who accidentally sells her soul to a demon. And I feel like this is super misleading, and this is where I had an issue with this book. One, I'm just going to say the main character is 17 and she seems like she acts much, much younger. So either you would need to age this character down, and this felt more like a middle grade to me in every way, shape, and form. Like it even felt like it was written for middle grade, or you needed to amp up like the time period. This is set in modern day, and maybe I could believe this was true if it was set back in like the 50s. But neither of those are true, and it just didn't feel like these acted like true teenagers. And it's not quite a satire because there was nothing to make fun of the genre. It says it's a horror comedy, and I don't feel like it fits either of those. There's no horror elements aside from the fact that it's a selling the soul to a demon, and there is like the Filipino folklore aspect. There is a monster that is from Filipino folklore, but the monster is not that scary either. And I don't know if it's just because it wasn't written scary, because it sounds like it could be. It's kind of like a shapeshifter type of being from Filipino folklore, and it's really cool, and there could be so many things being played up to the shapeshifting eeriness, but the book is not written in that way. And as far as comedy goes, it could just not be my humor. It seems very childish, and it's not super witty for me, so I just didn't enjoy it. It didn't feel like it fit any of the boxes it was promised. And then of course it does say it's queer, but the romance side of things also fell flat for me. The majority of the book was just these two girls, the main character and her best friend, who were secretly in love with each other but didn't want to tell either one, even though it seems apparent that other people in this book know that they're both gay and that they both like each other, but they don't know that. So it just, I don't know, the whole concoction of it just felt very flat for me. I wanted more. I wanted it to either be more horrified or more comedyfied, and I didn't get either of those elements. And as I mentioned, I think this would do better for a younger audience, either middle grade or like just turning into an adolescent, because it didn't feel like this was written for 17-year-olds. And it also kind of gave me a case of an adult woman detached from children who doesn't know how children speak anymore. So that's where I was thinking more of like, if this was more along the lines of Scooby-Doo and it was set in like the 50s or 60s, then maybe it would make more sense to me. As far as the rest of the description, it does kind of give Buffy vibes because the characters in this book give the semblances of the characters who are in Buffy. Like we have the main character who ends up being kind of like a monster hunter like Buffy, and we have the older mentor type of figure and the crew that's kind of going along for the ride with Buffy. But that's about the only thing that this description held up for me. And again, I like Buffy, but I've never watched it full through, and I've never really binge watched it to recent times, so I couldn't get enough of the references for it to also make sense for that connection. So yeah, this will be another one that I am donating, but I hope that somebody out there likes it. Next on my list is an ARC I received from the publisher, and that was Sunshine Nails by Mai Nguyen. And I do apologize if I'm not saying that name right, and if somebody else can correct me, please do. I thought this book was going to be way more fun than it ended up being, and for that reason, it is number 3 on my list. The premise, again, for this book was not how it was delivered. Basically, you are following an Asian Canadian family, and the parents of the family immigrated to Canada to give their children a better life, and they have 3 children. The daughter we're first introduced to in her POV has just had a failed relationship. They were supposed to get married. He cheated on her. She left everything in the United States in California, her house, all of her belongings, and she basically came back to Canada with nothing. And I thought it was going to just follow her. But then we get the points of views of all the other characters and the family members as well. And that was the start of the downfall, but we'll get there. The plot of this book is that the family owns a nail salon, and they have been the only nail salon in this community for several years. And all of a sudden, across the street, there is a big corporation moving in, and they're going to be like a chain corporation for nails and beauty. So they have very big competition for their nail salon, and it's also likely that it could be an issue for them to survive financially. The back of the cover promised that this family was going to get into hijinks as they try to sabotage the new business and the regional director or the manager of this particular building. And I thought it was going to be fun and funny and maybe had some heartfelt messages along the way, and it did not deliver any of that. So as I mentioned, the first problem is that there were multiple points of views and the chapters were very quick. It was a very short book, all things considered, and having the points of view split up between all of the family members just made it so that I didn't care for any single one of them, and I didn't feel attached to any of them. I didn't get to know them very well. We weren't in their heads very long each chapter, and it just had a hard time connecting with their motivations and understanding them. I'm sure there could be an argument that getting the different perspectives can offer insight into different problems that Asian Canadians, Asian Americans experience with immigrating and the diversity issues and owning businesses. But again, they weren't very long chapters, so I just couldn't feel connected to them, and it made it harder for me to understand. And the second problem I had with this book is that the premise of it being hilarious and funny, as in a comedy book, did not come through. It made all of the characters out to be bullies. They were mean, they were vicious, and they used very cruel methods like blackmail to get their way. And I personally just didn't find any humor in that. It wasn't even like there was some hijinks going on or things weren't going according to plan as they were trying to blackmail, which maybe then I could find it funny. But it was just straight up they threatened, they blackmailed, and they were not really sorry about it in order to keep their salon and their way of living. And I'm sure that this probably could happen in real life, and that owning a business as well as immigrating and not having a lot of money may make people desperate, but the book was pitched one way and I got a different story. Even the cover and everything is bright and cheery and it looks so fun, but that's just not the reading experience I had. So because of that reason, I have to put it at number 3. I just felt misled once again. And now we are getting into my least favorite books of the year. So at number 2, I have Kiss the Fae by Natalia Jaster. I don't even know where to begin with this book, but I will have the disclaimer that this is my other DNF of the year. I skimmed through it, I tried to read it, and then I kept skimming through it to try to get the gist of the rest of the book. And then I also attended book club because this was our February book club pick, and all the other participants, well, most of them also read this book. So by having conversations about it and learning more, I feel like I'm qualified to put it at number 2, even though I DNF'd it, because it just was not a good time. I feel like if I'm gonna make any judgments, this felt like a very rushed book. It was potentially written during lockdown, very fast with poor editing, and pushed out because we had time on our hands, and it got picked up pretty well on Kindle. And I do believe the author has other series out. I just am not interested because this book just felt so messy to me. It follows a main character who is in some sort of world. I don't think it's our world, but it could be our world adjacent in potentially a medieval time, but there are also references to some modern day things, so I don't really know what time period we're set in. But there is like the woods, the Fey woods. Like we know that there is a line of demarcation for her world and the Fey world, and you're not supposed to go into the Fey world. She lives with 2 other girls who are like her age, and they're sisters, and they're all hot, but they're not blood sisters. I think they're all adopted, and they live with this man who is their adoptive father, but he's also like never around, so I don't know what his point of even saying that. Like I don't know why they're not just roommates, because this father figure, to my knowledge, doesn't really come into play. And so whatever, we start the novel with our main character having sex with a man. She decides to kick him out because like she's only here for a good time. Like then like this guy is like actually trying to rob her, and she has to make a hasty escape, and she jumps out of the window onto her horse, whose name is Winnie Badass, and escapes, and then eventually ends up in the Fey world as she's trying to run away. So that's how the book starts, and it just, none of it made sense to me. I just don't know. I don't know. I swear I'm not making this up. The whole premise then is kind of like, it seems very, very heavily influenced by the movie Labyrinth. The main male character, who is a Fae with wings, is basically David Bowie in Labyrinth. Period. That's it. Like that is who it is. There are so many like almost blatantly like line for line, shot for shot scenes that I could say, oh, that's in Labyrinth. So just know that going in. It sounds cool. It could even be a Labyrinth retelling, but it's not pitched that way. So it kind of comes off more as plagiarism. But they end up in this world, and eventually her sisters, I think, somehow get roped into it, but I'm not sure. But our main character ends up going into like this tournament, and she has to like find her way out of the labyrinth in this tournament in order to keep her life. And along the way, this like Fae creature is like hates her, but is also helping her. And then you find out that there's some kind of weird connection. Like he's known her since she was like 9 and doing some creepy things with the wind, like rustling her like night dress up. And I'm like, that's weird. So yeah, that's about all I remember. I started tuning out after that because there was a lot of things that just didn't work for me in addition to the plot itself. There were lots of sex scenes in this. The sex scenes just seemed to have no purpose. They didn't make sense about when they were happening. There was like no lead up to the main characters having sex for the first time. And the sex scenes were not well written. It also, we tried to figure this out logistically in person in real life. And some of the sex scenes were literally impossible. Like, unless this woman had 20 feet arms, some of the things she was describing doing while doing something else was physically impossible. So keep that in mind. I also mentioned that I did not know a sense of like time or place when this novel would have been, if it was our world or not. And there were also certain things that with the language also pulled me right out of the story. She would be talking like a medieval speak, and then all of a sudden she would like start acting Southern. And I'm not kidding you. Like, I don't know I can't remember what word it was, but it's the equivalent of y'all. Like, she'd be like, wow, y'all are so cool over here. And you're like, what? Why did you just say that? You're in medieval, whatever. So that didn't really make sense to me. And then at one point she's like stroking his wings, because that's what we do in these novels nowadays. And she makes a mental comment that he has a nice set of flappers. That was a direct quote, by the way. And I'm like, again, who, like, I don't know why, like, my brain melted when I saw the word flappers, because that's weird. Why don't you just call them wings? And also, for some reason, I was thinking of jowls. So all I kept thinking in that scene was she was talking about his mouth and not his wings. So again, context and word choice is a big miss here. And I don't mean to rant so much, but I am all for some spicy novels, but please make it make sense to me. I don't want to read just nothing. Like, I want a little bit of a story there. So apparently one of my book club members did go ahead and read the rest of the series, and God love her, because she said it's the same exact thing every novel, just following a different sister. And I was like, I don't want to read that anymore. I didn't want to read this book. I'm so mad that you guys picked this. So yeah, that's the story of Kiss the Fae, and how much I did not enjoy myself in the beginning of this year, to the point that it has been 11 months and I can still rant about this novel. So take that as you will, friends. And then for my number one spot, we are going to have to be a little bit serious, and it kind of sucks that we have to be serious for this one. So for number one, my least favorite book of the year was The Lookback Window by Kyle Dylan Hertz. And this is hard for me to talk about because it definitely is a novel that is fiction, but very much reflective of the author's actual real life experiences. So I do need to make the distinction that I am not talking about the author and his experiences. I'm just talking about this novel and the way it was written. So The Lookback Window is a novel, a fictionalized novel that pulls elements from the author's real life as well as the period of time that just ended in November 2023 of a year-long look-back window, which is the period of time in New York that you could, no matter if and when the statute of limitations had been up, you could bring forward charges for any type of sexual assault. This novel is following a main character whose name is Dylan, and he is at the point in life where he has to decide if he is going to try to bring charges against his abuser. So trigger warning for the rest of this segment. I will leave timestamps in the below to get to the outro of this, but there is going to be trigger warnings for sexual assault. Even though I'm not going to be graphic, that is the topic in the entirety of this novel, so please take care of yourself. So in this book, the main character is exposed to a lot of horrific crimes as a teenager. And now he's in his 20s and he's living life very jaded and detached and not sure where to go. So as a teenager, he was repeatedly sexually assaulted because he was sold into sex trafficking. There is involuntary drug use as well as a lot of rape and assaults and passing around to other people. And that, I'm sure, would make anybody extremely depressed and traumatized, and it makes sense why the main character is so detached now. And I think that is a very important story and a very strong premise for a book, and it's definitely one that's needed. Now, for me, it really does come down to the way this book was written and why it left me feeling very weird at the end of it. Even though I finished it, I knew in my heart that I could not keep this book because I could not read it again. It was a bit triggering for even me, and I hand to the heavens that I do not get triggered very easily. I am a therapist. I take care of myself. I listen to traumatizing stuff all the time, and this book was a lot. So the main thing that I have an issue with is that we are exposed to intense, very graphic, very detailed rape scenes. And they were rape scenes that I was like, holy shit. I am feeling like I'm there. Whew. And that was a lot for me. I wasn't expecting it going in, and it happened a lot. In my opinion, I feel like one time getting that graphic could have sufficed because it would give you that visceral reaction and give you that mentality of oh my God, this could happen to real people. This is what happens to real people. So while I feel like the author captured that detached sense of feeling and how you kind of have to get out of your body to survive in those moments, he then proceeded to write multiple rape scenes over and over and over again in the same graphic detail. And they were relatively repetitive. I didn't gain anything new from reading those again. And it was just, again, kind of triggering. It was why are we reading this over and over again? I could have dealt with one triggering scene and then maybe an implication for the rest. The other thing I struggled with is that not only were there non-consensual rape scenes in the book, but then there were consensual sex scenes with the main character and his partner, as well as other random encounters he has with random men that are consensual, but they're written exactly the same. So it's very hard to distinguish what he's consenting to and what he's not, and how the scenes are different. And with careful writing, you could make the comparisons that because of all the complex trauma this main character has experienced, he is having this bleed into his everyday life. But the author was not able to make that comparison in my opinion. The main character is just so detached that he just seems detached from the novel as well. We don't get any of his inner monologue. We don't get any of his thoughts. We don't get him processing his trauma or trying to understand what that means for him and why he's like this. The whole novel is written as if like you are in like a daze, like there's a sack over your head and you're wandering through life. And I'm sure that has its place, but given the graphic nature of some of the scenes where you're so involved in them, and then the detachment to his everyday life, I just felt like we weren't gaining anything. We weren't learning something, and we weren't really given motivation. At the end of the novel, which is a spoiler, he does not go through with the claim. He doesn't go through with pressing charges. He also doesn't really have any grounds to press charges on. And it's just kind of like it ends. Like we just have this really depressing ending, which could again have its place. But for me, I just felt like this book was so hopeless and graphic and it just, I don't know. I just needed more depth, I think. If there was just more depth for the character, and I'm not even saying that he had to solve all of his problems by the end of the novel, but I feel like I wanted him to acknowledge that like things were not okay and that he, or at least that he wasn't responding in the right way to things, or like, you know, his trauma has completely colored his life to the point where like he doesn't know what's real or what's not real, or like what real love is supposed to feel like, or like how he's supposed to function in day-to-day life. Especially because he's just going through the motions. And again, he's having a lot of consensual sex now too. Like the one scene really early in the book is like he just had sex with his boyfriend who's about to be his husband. And then he goes out onto the balcony and then gives another man who's not his fiance a blowjob. But there's like no explanation. It just happens. So I'm like, are they together? Like, is he having a one-night stand? Are they together? Are they having issues? Is this a normal thing? Are they open? But we don't know. I don't know what their arrangement is, because we never really learn about them as people. We just know that this horrific thing happens, and very clearly the main character is not okay. But that's about it. So I don't know. As a therapist, this is one of those books that I do not think I would recommend to anybody, unfortunately. And it sucks because, again, there's a message there that is so important. And it's so important to let people know that sex trafficking is real, that complex trauma is real, and that men and queer individuals are at a high risk for all this kind of exploitation and trauma. So there's definitely things that should be talked about, but this book for me just didn't do it in a way that felt powerful or felt like life-changing. It just felt more traumatizing. In the therapy field, there is such a thing called vicarious trauma, and vicarious trauma is where you are experiencing trauma by listening to it from somebody else. So you never experienced it, but by going into the detail and the graphicness of what you're hearing, you can then start to feel trauma symptoms. So for instance, as a therapist, this can happen a lot because we're always listening to trauma. But if somebody tells me that they were in a flood and that all of this crazy stuff happened to them and they almost died, and then I start having nightmares of being in the flood, that is vicarious trauma. So I think this is a book that can easily end up giving you vicarious trauma, and or it can be so severely triggering if you have gone through any type of sexual assault. So I can't recommend it. It is out there for you guys if you're interested in reading it, but for me, this was like the worst book of the year. And it was the worst book just because the content did not sit well with me in the way that it was written. And that is my opinion. I'm sorry I had to go into such a deep discussion about that book, but I really want to emphasize that I am not like blaming the author, and I'm not saying that he wrote the book poorly or anything like that. It's just that for me, I had such a hard time connecting because of the graphic nature of the book, and that could just be on me. As I mentioned, the author has gone through similar experiences in real life, so I imagine that this was a very important book for him to write, and I do wish him well, and I hope that he does write something else, maybe in a less graphic way, because like I was saying about like the non-consensual and the consensual scenes, Again, the consensual scenes were like so graphic too. And we just had a lot of conversations about bodily fluids that I just didn't need in the novel, to be honest. So yeah, so it wasn't just like one scene being graphic, it was both types. And again, they were described almost identically, so it was hard to even tell you. Like if I picked up the book and read one of those scenes, I would not be able to tell you if it was consensual or non-consensual because they were written so similarly. All right, I'm gonna end my soapbox here because I don't really want to talk about this novel anymore. So with that said, that was my worst books of 2023. I had just a couple misses and then some that really just made my brain hurt and break. But overall, this year wasn't a bad year for reading. The first 4 of this video really were like 3 stars. Like I didn't really rate those lower. It was the last 2 that I ended up rating a little bit lower, but I didn't have any 1 stars this year. There was no Empire of the Vampire. Thank the Lords. And overall, I'm excited to talk about my favorites of the year because we're really gonna have some fun with those. So let me know down below if you've read any of these books in 2023 or prior and what your thoughts are on them. And let me know if anything sounds actually interesting to you. Like I said, for me, they didn't make it work, but it might work for you. And with that said, I will see you tomorrow for another Vlogmas video. But for now, goodbye.